still there. I can't see where she's going, but I hope it's here. Life ain't what it seems. There's still a part of me that's trying. Come lay on my chest. You can find a little rest from hiding. Don't let this go. Don't let it fall away. Don't worry, we'll take it slow. Just don't let it go. Just don't let it go.
I own 7 35mm lenses, all ranging in aperture, style, sensor coverage, and character. But one thing they all lack is autofocus. That's why this lens, the new Sirui Aurora 35mm F1.4, caught my attention real quick as an affordable 35mm alternative that's nearly perfect. But there's one thing about it that took me completely by surprise. Anyway, let's get into it. What's up, nerds? Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Ben, and I make videos about filmmaking, gear, and camera stuff. Now, if you've been following my channel for a while, you already know 35mm is my focal length. It's wide enough to capture the environment, the whole landscape, but is still tight enough to draw your attention to the subject. I could easily shoot an entire film on this one lens and never feel limited. That's honestly why I own so many 35mm lenses, probably too many 35mm. But even though the other 35mm I own all have their strengths and differences, I have considered picking up the Sony G 35 or the Sigma Art 35 because as a hybrid filmmaker and creator, autofocus does make a pretty big difference in a lot of the content that I shoot. But those lenses are pretty expensive, and I haven't gotten around to justifying that purchase just yet. But honestly, I'm glad I waited on those lenses because this lens is more than half the price of the G Master and almost half the price of the Sigma Art. And I think that it has a little extra sauce compared to those lenses that a lot of people are gonna love and also a lot of people are gonna hate. Now, I've had the chance to shoot with this lens for the last few months. I've done the best I could to use it in as many situations as I possibly could, but honestly, I've been pretty busy gaffing on a lot of different sets lately, so I didn't have as much footage as I probably would have wanted, but I've still got plenty to show you guys. Now, Sirui did send this lens for me to check out, but they are not sponsoring this video. No money changed hands, and they don't get any input or review on this video's creation. So let's start with what this lens actually is. The Aurora 35 1.4 is Sirui's second full-frame autofocus lens, following the Aurora 85, which I've already reviewed. You can watch that video up here if you get a chance. And this lens is available for Sony E mount, Nikon Z, Leica L, and Fuji X mount. It's built entirely from metal, weighs just under 500 grams, and has a little bit of weather sealing to it. If you've already used the Sirui Aurora 85, well, this is pretty much the same feel. On the outside, you've got a smooth, declickable aperture ring and a focus ring that still feels surprisingly cinematic, even though it's a focus by wire autofocus system. You've got an AF/MF switch, a declick switch, and a custom button, and an aperture locking switch, which is new from the 85. Now, on the front of the lens, you've got a smaller 62mm filter thread. Now, you can open this lens all the way up to f1.4 or close it down to f16, and all that is packaged at a very competitive price of $549 US. Now, I'm going to flip the script here and dive right into the autofocus performance, because in my opinion, Sirui took this specific lens up to another level. Since Sirui has started making autofocus lenses, I've had the privilege to test and review all of them, including their anamorphics, the sniper lenses, and the previous Aurora, and their autofocus has always been the biggest con for me. But they must have switched up the recipe here, because the autofocus on this lens is significantly improved over the 85mm Sirui Aurora. It's not perfect, and I'm sure that the Sony G Master would have this lens wiping the floor, but it tracks the subject very well, even in low light situations, and even on wide landscape shots, it held its ground pretty dang well. Now, the focus is also pretty quiet, unlike the anamorphic 40mm that still screams every time it tries to focus on my Sony FX30. By the way, all the testing and footage that you'll see throughout this video is with my Sony a7 IV. The only trouble I noticed was it struggling to grab focus on a face around the edges of the frame in my specific control controlled testing. Now, the manual focus experience is also very improved. I think it's a lot better than their other lenses, even though it's a focus by wire system. So Sirui, I don't know what extra sauce you put in this one, but good job. I like it. I still wouldn't have this as my first pick if you're an event photographer or videographer that needs tack sharp focus every time, no matter what. I don't do event coverage or weddings and stuff like that anymore, so I'm not dying for perfectly consistent autofocus, which I think is why I haven't been able to justify the cost of the G Master just yet. But in cases that I've been using this lens in talking head situations or single subject scenarios, or even in some pretty dang low light situations, the autofocus has done a great job. Now, if you want a lens with solid sharpness, wide open, with little distortion, chromatic aberration, well, this is not the lens for you. On my channel, that isn't a first priority for me because I'm not out shooting studio quality headshots, and frankly, that's the last thing I'm expecting from a third-party budget prime lens. Now, 90% of the work I do is video related, where I can experiment and emulate the look of cinema as much as I want. And if I'm shooting photography, it's typically just for fun or shooting on my film cameras as a way for me to relax. Hopefully that gives you some context for how I've been using this lens and how I plan to use this lens. So yes, wide open, this lens is pretty soft around the edges. It does distort a little bit, especially in the bokeh. At f1.4 and even down to f2, there is a fair amount of chromatic aberration to go around. And the flaring is also pretty sensitive, and it does decrease the contrast of the lens really quick. I found myself using a matte box or the provided lens hood pretty often just to control those flares a little more. So for the clinical photographer that's looking for the perfect lens, this is not it. But here's why those features are actually my favorite part of this lens. I think for a long time, I've always been looking for a best of both worlds type of situation where I can have character of vintage and anamorphic lenses, but also have autofocus. My workaround for that has actually been DJI's LiDAR system, using that with my cine lenses and my vintage lenses. That's been a really great solution. You know, it takes time to rig up, it takes time to calibrate and things like that, and it's not always practical. And typically in situations where I want to take just one lens with me, autofocus just becomes a priority. So I think this lens approaches more of that best of both worlds for me, because the Aurora doesn't look sterile or clinical like a lot of modern autofocus lenses do nowadays. Wide open, it has this beautiful depth and a slightly swirly bokeh that honestly reminds me of some of my vintage lenses and even a bit of the anamorphic look I've seen from Blazar and even Sirui cinema glass. That is not something I expected, especially after testing their 85mm version, which felt much cleaner and more natural. This is what I've been wanting, but in Surui's anamorphic glass, which is character and magic. This is not an anamorphic lens, but I feel like for some reason, it seems closer than what they've been getting to with the other lenses. Now, I understand that not everyone is going to want this in an autofocus prime, but to me, this is so refreshing. A lens that still has a really nice image, but has some actual character that makes it different from all the other vanilla options that we can choose from. Because let's be real, there are a ton of different lenses out there that you can pick. It's the reason I own so many 35mm lenses, is because I've kind of been looking for the look that makes my work stand out from the next vanilla creator out there. You see, unfortunately, we live in a day and age where a lot of people in the camera space are chasing higher resolution, more specs and detail, and this has, in my opinion, made new gear boring. I am perfectly content with the gear that I have for my professional work, because for half the video work that I do, a Sony camera and my Sigma 24-70 will absolutely get the job done. But for the other part of my work where I get to experiment and try new things, I've looked to take a step back and focus more on character and style to further define my look, as long as it matches the story I'm trying to tell. You can get this lens to be pretty dang sharp if you stop down to f2.8 or even f4, f5.6. It sharpens up pretty nicely at that point. But when you're all the way wide open, it's pretty soft around the corners. It's still sharp enough in the center for me to call it usable. Now, I'm a major fan of this 35mm and will 100% be adding this lens to my kit. In fact, if Blackmagic does end up bringing continuous autofocus to the Pixis 6K, I'll probably pick this up in the L mount model just to have that as an autofocus option for open gate. That'd be pretty sweet. But hey, like I mentioned before, I know this look won't be for everyone. So if you're looking for a more consistent, clinical look in a 35mm with 100% fast, reliable autofocus, then for Sony shooters, the Sony G Master 35 f1.4 or the Sigma Art 35 f1.4 will be fantastic options to pick up. Anyways, I hope this video was helpful in learning more about this new Sirui Aurora lens. If you're interested in purchasing this lens or some other 35mm options, well, there are links to them in the description. They are affiliate links, so if you purchase from those links, it does support the channel. Thank you so much if you do. And if you enjoyed this video, then you can watch this video next. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell button so you never miss out on new young filmmaker content. Good luck filmmaking.